So, Robby, what's on your radar?
After a month of disastrous news coverage following various revelations of alleged misdeeds, Facebook reached its nadir on Monday, with the site suffering a massive outage. There are many conclusions one can draw from the company's string of ill turns. Many people no doubt think the various problems make a stronger case for regulation. I actually have an opposite take. I think Facebook's fundamental weaknesses have at last been exposed for all to see, and we should be less worried about the company's dominance than ever before. Let me explain. Now, the company's recent woes have fueled a new wave of criticism from tech skeptics on both the left and right who want the government to either break up big tech, take away its liability protection, or either prohibit, or possibly require, depending on whom you ask, so-called misinformation on the platforms. A major theme of the big tech battles is that former President Donald Trump, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and everyone in between want to go after the companies, but for opposite and often conflicting reasons. Conservatives think the platforms engage in too much moderation and have corrupted U.S. democracy in favor of 2020 election winner Joe Biden. Liberals think Facebook doesn't practice nearly enough moderation, allowing right-wing violence and faulty info about quack COVID cures to spread. And also they think it corrupted U.S. democracy in favor of 2016 election winner Donald Trump. That the most extreme and opportunistic members of both political factions like to blame all their problems on big tech probably tells us more about them than it does about Facebook. If there's one fear that unites the left and right, though, it's moral panic about social media, causing feelings of depression and anxiety among teenage girls. This isn't a new fear. The psychologist Jean Twenge has been writing about it for years. And even Jonathan Haidt, co-author of The Coddling of the American Mind and a figure generally well-respected by people in my own social networks, think there's something to it. And it received a powerful narrative boost recently after a former Facebook employee came forward as a whistleblower and provided a series of highly touted scoops to the Wall Street Journal. The most significant of these scoops, as judged by the fact that it prompted an immediate Senate hearing, concerned Facebook's internal efforts to gauge Instagram's ill effects on the mental wellness of young people.
What's super tragic is Facebook's own research says, as these young women begin to consume this eating disorder content, they get more and more depressed, and it actually makes them use the app more. And so they end up in this feedback cycle where they hate their bodies more and more. Facebook's own research says it is not just that Instagram is dangerous for teenagers, that it harms teenagers. It's that it is distinctly worse than other forms of social media.
The whistleblower, Frances Haugen, will testify before Congress on Tuesday. Thanks to Haugen and the Journal's reporting, we know that Facebook attempted to survey teen users on how the platforms were impacting their mental health. Unsurprisingly, their findings were not entirely encouraging. 1 in 5 respondents said Instagram made them feel worse about themselves, and teens already struggling with mental illness said the platform was giving them a harder time. Ostensibly, the problem with Instagram is that it promotes social competition, the race for likes and comments, among users posting artificial, filtered images of themselves, which may exacerbate body image issues. Of course, there's absolutely nothing new about this. Glossy magazines have been accused of doing the same thing for decades, but no one talks about the existential threat of Cosmopolitan or Teen Vogue. High school is a major source of misery and depression for many teenagers, but as Mike Solana pointed out in a terrific and panic-countering article on the anti-Facebook crusade, no one is demanding that the Secretary of Education be hauled before Congress. Haugen's major achievement was really one of self-branding. Since the mainstream media is already inclined to believe the very worst about social media, a disfavored upstart competitor, anyone who comes forward and tells the media exactly what they want to hear on this subject is going to be celebrated as a hero. Thus, Haugen is already being hailed as some sort of brave truth-teller. Even though her perspective is very much the popular one in progressive circles, Facebook emboldens hate and disinformation, it has too much power, etc., etc. On this last charge, it's never been more apparent, to me at least, that something closer to the opposite is true. Far from occupying some dominant and unassailable position in modern society, Facebook's relevance is probably fading. The company is desperate to attract the sort of users, young people mostly, who provide cultural cachet and excite advertisers and investors. But this is increasingly a losing battle. Facebook, or Boomer Book, as some people derisively call it, has never been more unpopular with the kids, and even Instagram faces tremendous competition from Snapchat, TikTok, and whatever cool new thing is coming along next. The truth is that Facebook's thirst for young users is less about dominating a new market and more about staving off irrelevance, wrote the New York Times' Kevin Roose in an article that sounded a highly pessimistic note with respect to the company's long-term health. Facebook's research tells us a clear story, and it's not a happy one. For the past several years, anti-tech crusaders on both the left and right have assured the public that Facebook is a menace and can only be stopped via aggressive government action, antitrust legislation, Section 230 reform, and so on. Despite repeated threats, politicians never made good on their promises to do something, and yet Facebook is undeniably in a much weaker position. While it's hard to predict the future, it's even harder to picture the company mounting some massive comeback and becoming a popular trendsetter once again. Expectations that Facebook had fought its way into an unbreakable, permanent, market-dominant position suddenly look a little bit foolish to me. In fact, Facebook may soon find itself in the position of needing government intervention to maintain its dominance. It's worth remembering that the company has actually come out in favor of reforming Section 230, the federal statute that limits legal liability that online platforms face. Recall that a lot of anti-tech folks supported this tweak as a move to counter big tech's malfeasance, but Facebook has concluded it would actually be a good thing for Facebook. Quote, I believe that Section 230 would benefit from thoughtful changes to make it work better for people, but identifying a way forward is challenging given the course of people arguing, sometimes for contradictory reasons, that the law is doing more harm than good. That's a quote from Mark Zuckerberg in March 2021 when he appeared before Congress. Of course, tinkering with the liability protections enjoyed by social media sites could actually help Facebook stave off competition. As long as the company remains the largest social media site, its armies of moderators might be better prepared to deal with increased moderation demands than smaller rivals like Twitter. Facebook is also better positioned to lobby and steer whatever new governmental agency arises to enforce a modified version of Section 230. All those who support Facebook's bid for ongoing relevance should want the company to handpick the members of a new federal bureaucracy tasked with regulating big tech's policies. On the other hand, anyone who thinks the company should face free and fair competition might prefer to leave the matter out of the government's hands. My new book, Tech Panic, is subtitled Why We Shouldn't Fear Facebook and the Future. The events of the past few weeks provide additional concrete reasons. Zuckerberg's platform is not in control of our lives, our economy, or our democracy, and the mainstream media's cynical attempts to convince the public otherwise should be easier to dismiss in light of recent events. Now, I know you have a very different take. We're going to be talking about Facebook a lot today. But I do think that the idea that the panic over Facebook, that it's so in control of every facet of our lives, our democracy, the narratives about Facebook for both the previous two election cycles, I really can't see us saying next election cycle, years from now, man, Facebook is still this big threat. It's not bringing in the users it wants to. Some of this stuff to reach out to kids, which I agree should be criticized, is like a desperate plea to be relevant again that I don't think they're going to recapture.
Yeah, and I actually do agree with a decent amount of this story, which is that kind of the arc of Facebook is bending, or at least Facebook Blue is bending toward irrelevance. Like I think that's right. At the same time, it's interconnectedness, it's Messenger, it's WhatsApp, it's Instagram, and its broad panoply of other access to data is propping up what otherwise might be an even more irrelevant company. And so if you split off the various parts, then they'd have to compete on their own and might actually become better social media sites. The problem, and I have not internally worked this out, is that if and when you split them off on their own, in order to compete with these other platforms, then they have to crank up their algorithm to 11, which means doing what Finsta's, which does not exist.
Right.
But basically, if Instagram identifies somebody suffering with anorexia, then they start feeding them content that just fuels that. Right. Because that's good for engagement, and that's good for profit, and that's good for their competition in a free market space. So I have not quite sorted out, my own views on how to deal with this, but I think your point that Facebook Blue is fading, I think is a real one.
Well, I'm really looking forward to your radar coming up next.